education in sometime in the 1990s at Brown University, where I was a history major. I had no plans of going into medicine or medical research at the time, but ended up working at the Fenway Community Health Center after I finished school. While there, I decided to go into medicine and took med classes at night and summers so I could start medical school at Albert Einstein in 1998. After finishing there, I did my medicine residency at Montefiore Medical Center. And then after that, decided that I really couldn't go straight into fellowship and needed to take a year off to catch my breath. Serendipitously, Dr. Tom Coates, who I interviewed with when I was interviewing for fellowship late in my third year of residency, offered me the opportunity to do a gap year doing research projects in Peru, which was where I first met Dr. Klausner for the first time. As Dr. Coates, Dr. Klausner, and Dr. Carlos Cáceres from Cayetano Heredia were my mentors for that year. Talk a little bit more about what I did then later. But after that year, I went back to UCLA, where I'd matched for fellowship, clinical year of training, and then was able to move back to Lima for another 8 years to continue my research and my career. After ID fellowship, I spent another year on a global HIV prevention research fellowship, which provided another year before joining the faculty at UCLA and getting my own funding and starting my career. So that first year that I was in Peru was actually very helpful for the rest of my career and set the stage for a lot of things. So it's been extremely important to me. What I first did was studies on the epidemiology of HIV and STIs and associated factors among MSM and trans women. That was particularly important because there wasn't, at that time, a tremendous amount of data on these issues. And so in order to develop research issues, understand what the problems are before you can start designing solutions. I also did a study on systems for detection of acute HIV conversion in high-risk populations. All these studies were in collaboration with Dr. Cáceres and Heredia, and as I said, they laid the foundation for the future work. They also were very helpful in terms of having that year before I was in fellowship training that allowed these projects to get started and set up. And while I was in training and waiting for things to happen, they would happen on their own during that year, so that by the end of my training year, I had to go back to and start analyzing and start publishing. So as I said, I spent 1 year in Los Angeles doing clinical training before I went back to Lima to resume my research career and used those specific questions that came up in my initial projects as the basis for my future research agenda. By the time I returned to Lima, I was able to start writing an application for a NIH K23 award using the preliminary data that I'd collected begun collecting during that year, and have the foundation to prepare the application that way. As often happens, the initial application for funding was not funded, and the second application for funding was not funded. But on the third try, it was. So just probably something you'll hear a lot in the future is that you have to keep going. Don't take no for an answer. And if at first you don't succeed, try, and sometimes try again. Once I received the K23, I was appointed to faculty at UCLA, Gavin School of Medicine. My K23 were studies on partner notification among MSM and trans women following an STD diagnosis. So there are a few different components to it. There's formative qualitative research on the context of partner notification, the acceptability of new notification technology. Then I did a quantitative exploratory study where I surveyed 400 MSM and trans women who'd been diagnosed with HIV and STI on their attitudes and practices related to partner notification. This is principally about people's anticipated behavior. We weren't following up with their actual behavior. And then finally, we did a pilot randomized control trial where we tested an internet-based notification system for MSM who had syphilis on their partner notification outcomes. This was modified due to the preliminary research that we'd done. Initially, we were planning on doing HIV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis all together in one study. For reasons I'll explain in a minute, we separated out gonorrhea and chlamydia, and we eliminated HIV from the study altogether. Based on the formative research that we did, everyone that we spoke to or we surveyed said that HIV was entirely different from these other STIs and that they were unlikely ever to notify anyone about HIV, so that we decided it really wasn't going to be useful to include that in the trial, as we weren't expecting to see any effect at all on HIV notification. So based on that formative research, we limited it to syphilis for partner notification. At the same time, I worked with Dr. Coates to develop an ARC-21 study on expedited partner therapy, or EPT. which overlapped with my K-23 research. So we did formative qualitative research. Again, there was a lot of overlap with similar issues. And then we did a pilot study of EPT and its impact on notification among MSM who'd been diagnosed with gonorrhea and chlamydia. So that's where we separated out the GCCT subjects. But we were able to combine the two studies in terms of screening so that we didn't have to duplicate efforts. We were able to conserve resources. So we screened for both the partner notification and the EPT studies at the same time. Anybody with gonorrhea or chlamydia was sent to the EPT study, and anybody with syphilis was sent to the partner notification study. Maximize resources that way. As I said, I was in the first class of GloCal fellows. At that time, the fellowship was a little bit different. It was provided, one of the groups it was provided to was junior faculty, and they gave me the support to expand the screening procedures, so I was able to expand the pool of people that we screened for STIs for these studies, and was very helpful in that respect. During my K, I did a master's in clinical trials with London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I did it through a distance learning program, so while I was still in Peru, I would basically take self-taught online courses with exams at the end of the year. And as I said, that was funded by the K-23, so I didn't have to pay for the tuition, which was very nice. While funded by the K-23, I also did some other side projects that weren't specifically related to that proposal. Because the K-23 gives you funding for 4 to 5 years, you do have the opportunity to do some other things at the side and build your career in that way. This was helpful both in terms of exploring new areas for research and other research questions, but also in terms of expanding my collaboration network and developing relationships with other people on a trial or short-term basis before committing to a larger project or grant with them. Also allowed me to get seed grant funding from local institutions. The research was funded through seed grant funding from local institutions or by building on existing grants that other people already had. So it was difficult to get additional funding, but there are some ways to get it as well while you're on a K, Career Development Award. Some of the specific studies that we did, one was a study of sampling methodologies for HIV and STI surveillance among MSM and trans women in Peru, which I did with the research group Impacta. That was funded by CARE Peru, who was paying for a sentinel surveillance study. And then as part of it, they decided to use our idea of testing out different sampling methods for HIV and STI surveillance. So again, an example of a small source of funding outside of the NIH system. I helped Ann Dewar from the University of Washington in doing the preliminary work for a study that she was working on called SABES. We looked at HIV testing practices among high-risk MSM in order to help her develop her project, which was focused on testing it, MSM at high risk for HIV in order to identify people in the acute stage of seroconversion. And then finally, we got seed grant funding from UCLA to do a project looking at a telenovela, which is a Spanish soap opera. This was with the research group Via Libre. We did a series of workshops with MSM and trans women from different socioeconomic strata, and sexual identities, trying to develop characters, plot lines for a soap opera series that would address issues of HIV and STI prevention in these populations. So just a few examples of the different smaller projects that went on at the same time. Also at the same time, we developed, together with Dr. Klausner, Dr. Coates, and other people from UCLA and our collaborators in Peru and Brazil, the SAPPHIRE program, which is an NIH-funded R25 training program focused on comprehensive HIV prevention in Latin America. We take pre- and postdoctoral MD investigators from US institutions. And the model for this program is really based on that initial gap year that I had in Peru. As I said, it was extremely important in my career to have that time to develop research, develop a foundation in Peru, and get things going before I actually started my formal career. So the idea for this is it provides people with a similar opportunity to spend 1 year in Peru or Brazil, and now Colombia, working on a specific area of HIV prevention research and developing their future career. It also built on the existing collaborations that UCLA faculty already had with other investigators in Lima and Rio de Janeiro. Most importantly, it provides a basis for mentoring and teaching and cultivating the next generation of prevention researchers. Also for providing infrastructure development, both for UCLA and for our network. So a goal of the program is to support and promote connections between researchers and institutions across the SAPPHIRE program. And so the funding from the R25 has been extremely important for that. We're currently in the 9th year of the program and applying for our competitive renewal once again, which we have to do every 5 years and is an enormous pain. After my K-23 ended, I had a couple of different NIH R34 grants, which are clinical trial planning grants. One was called TransPrep, is a collaboration with Impacta, as well as researchers from the Fenway Institute. And that was looking at social network-based systems to promote PrEP adherence among transgender women in Peru. That study's been done. We learned a lot from it, and we're planning to do a future R01. The other R34 trial planning grant was with Via Libre. It was on rectal STI screening as a platform for comprehensive HIV prevention among high-risk MSM. That study's also done, was highly successful, and we're planning for a future R01 with that as well. At the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, I returned to Los Angeles for personal reasons, but maintained my connection with Peru. And at that time, I started working with Dr. Stephen Shoptaw at the UCLA Vine Street Clinic, which was very fortuitous because my K-23 funding had just ended. I was looking to replace a lot of funding in a very short period of time, and fortunately, things developed very well. I initially started working for them as a clinician, seeing patients for the M study, which is an epidemiologic study of African American, Latino, and substance-using MSM in Los Angeles, and then also a clinician for the HPTN 073 study of PrEP use among African American MSM. Things went well, so they asked me to be the investigator of record for a current study, which is called AMP, or Antibody-Mediated Prevention, which is the HPTN 085, HPTN 703 study, and also for the HPTN 083 study of injectable cabotegravir for pre-exposure prophylaxis. I'm the investigator of record for the site on both those studies, both of which are currently ongoing and are very excited to be a part of. We are currently applying for a renewal of the clinical trials unit here at UCLA with Vine Street as the lead prevention site. And so based on the success of our collaboration so far, they've asked me in the future to become the leader of the Vine Street CRS. So that relationship has developed well and organically over time. And then finally, we recently were awarded R01 with Via Libre to develop this expedited partner therapy project. So to take the pilot trial that we did and look at, on a large scale, the impact on public health and model the impact on HIV and STI transmission in the larger population based on the research that we had done previously in the R21 trial. So why does anybody care about all this? Well, for a few different reasons. I think thinking back on what I've done and how I got there and who helped me get there and why it happened, I just came up with a few points for you all that I think might be very helpful. One, when you're choosing an area of research, yes, it's important, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You need an area of focus. It should be a good one, but we often see people getting paralyzed choosing between different ideas because they think this is the most important decision of their lives. They don't want to mess it up, and they want to make sure that they get the perfect research area. I know that Jeff and I were speaking with one of his advisees who was an ID fellow at UCLA a few months ago, and he was suffering from this because he had several great ideas, and he wasn't sure which one to go with, and Jeff and I both gave him the same recommendation, which was just pick one. Whatever you do, it'll be fine, and it'll be a good foundation, and you're not going to figure out which one's perfect. Just pick something and go with it, and develop it from there. Two, I'd recommend synergizing. So I talked before about how we were able to maximize different funding sources and combine aspects of different research questions in order to take what are usually very limited amounts of funding, especially in your early career, and maximize them or synergize them to get the most bang for your buck. So a good example of that was in the screening studies for expedited partner therapy and partner notification, taking different sources of funding to expand the pool of screening subjects for this study and screen the largest number of people possible without trying to devote specific resources to each of the different studies in that respect. When you're doing early career research, it's really important that it's something that's well-defined and that is feasible, but you also want to think outside the box a little bit. So, but I would definitely emphasize the well-defined and feasible part of it. You don't want to do anything that's overly ambitious. You don't want to do anything that's too high risk. You do want to do something that's creative, but you also want to make sure that it's something manageable and something that you can do easily with defined endpoints so that you know specifically when you achieve success and when you've accomplished your goals. Especially in your early career, I would take every opportunity that comes up within reason. New collaborations with people, especially when you start with a small test collaboration before committing to a large project or anything like that with somebody you don't know. Through these new collaborations, you have the chance to expand your network and to explore new ideas that you might not have considered before. At the same time, there is the risk of overextending yourself. And one thing we always recommend for early career investigators is to focus on depth, not breadth. So pick a topic and expand it in great depth. Don't try to work on 20 different areas at once. Again, pick one and focus on it. And then you can have some small side projects as well. But really, you want to have one major focus of your research. And then finally, diversify your portfolio. If you can, it's great to get funding from different institutions so that you're not dependent on, for instance, solely on the NIH or solely on one source of funding. But then also have applications or projects at different stages of development. So the best researchers always have something that's a short-term project where they're working on right now, for instance, writing up the results of a study for a paper, a midterm project, so something that's in the field or plan to go in the field where you're going to be collecting data and then in the future writing up this data and writing papers. And then the long-term projects. These are things that you're planning or writing applications for funding at the current time. And like I said, the best people have a balance of all three, the short term, the midterm, and the long term going on at the same time so that they have different things to do and they also are planning well for the future that way. So that's the end of the prepared slides that I have. I'd be happy to take any questions or discuss with you all.
All right, outstanding. So thank you very much, Jesse. It was really wonderful to hear that trajectory and hear about, you know, the balance between being focused on some specific research areas and developing, you know, expertise with STIs and HIV in men who have sex with men and STIs and HIV, and then also, you know, within that, thinking about partner notification, partner delivered therapy, networks, and population-based interventions, and then be able to, you know, take that and when, you know, one door closed, be able to parlay that into, you know, new and broader activities back in Los Angeles with maybe a little bit more clinical research focus. You know, I think it's always somewhat daunting to junior researchers, you know, when they hear these successes, you know, how they can make that happen. But you've highlighted, you know, some issues of being, you know, persistent. Your K was funded on its third submission, about collaborations, you know, identifying mentors, but also importantly, not one mentor. I mean, you had multiple mentors in different fields, different backgrounds, and by collaborating with multiple mentors on projects, you know, over time, different opportunities made themselves available to you. And then also, you know, throughout all this, you've been very productive in, you know, publishing, creating your own independent projects, developing the Sapphire training program, you know, on your own, but building a team around you to help support that. So I cannot see, I'm on my phone, so I can't see the Zoom questions or participants. So maybe Lucia, you could help, you know, identify anyone with any questions or try to manage some of the questions and discussion with the fellows.
Yeah, sure. If you have a question, please unmute yourself. And if we have many questions and you want to put your question on the list, please use that chat box function. But you can unmute yourself if you have a question.
Hi, it's James here from Kenya. Thanks, Jesse, for an excellent presentation. Just a quick question around putting in submissions for grants. At what point do you decide or say that's enough, so that you're not preoccupied with wasting your time on something that may never get funded? At what point do you get to know that, you know, that's enough, it's time to change to a different topic? And secondly, for that grant that you had to resubmit so many times, 3 times, what was the final form? Like, did you have to change 80% of it or just 20%, or you had very minimal changes for it to get funded? Thanks.
Thanks. Those are good questions. So I'll answer the second one first, because that's easier in terms of how much to change. Over the course of the 3 submissions, it changed dramatically. The most important comment I kept getting from reviewers was that what I was proposing was too ambitious. So it was a matter of scaling back and cutting different aims and focusing on a fewer number of aims and more depth again, rather than trying to do too many different things at once. When I was writing my K, I felt like this was my chance. I was going to get 5 years of funding, and I wanted to do something really big and important. It seemed reasonable to me what I was proposing, but the reviewers really thought that it was too much and asked me to scale back the project. So that was mostly what those changes were. In terms of when do you know when to call it quits with the grant, it's really hard to say, and it's you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I never had a grant funded the first time that I submitted it, so you're always planning to submit at least twice for any grant. And then after the second time, you really have to take it from there and see what the reviewers have said, see what your feelings about the project are, see if the comments that have been raised are addressable, or if they're asking you to do things or raising objections to your project that are really insurmountable. I think a good example of this was that telenovela project that I talked about, the Spanish soap opera. We'd applied for an R21, which is an exploratory trial grant for 2 years, to try to expand that study. And I was collaborating with some people from Via Libre and then a colleague from the University of Oregon. So we submitted that R21. We didn't get discussed, and we didn't think the comments were all that great, but we resubmitted again. Thought it was a really great proposal. Again, didn't get discussed, but we felt it was just not a great match with the reviewers, that they really weren't getting what we were saying. So after 2 tries with the NIH, your proposal's dead, and you have to start over from scratch to treat it as a new proposal. So we worked on it again, revised it, submitted it a third time, and again, it wasn't discussed. And at that point, we felt that was when we decided it was time to pull the plug with it. We looked at the comments. We felt that the reviewers were attacking us from both sides. Excuse me. We initially had one set of reviewers who thought it was not enough of a psychological experiment and focused too much on public health. And then when we resubmitted, addressing those concerns, we got the comment that it wasn't focused enough on public health. It was too much of a psychological experiment. So at that point, and again, it was different factors that caused us to make that decision. It was not just that the reviewers were giving us a hard time, but it was also that I and the other lead people involved in it decided it just wasn't worth our time at that point, because it was outside of our main area of research. It was sort of a side project. It was going to take a lot of work to get to what the reviewers wanted, if we were ever able to do so. And then the third person at Oregon State who's was involved in it had gotten a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant to look at similar things with a domestic project, and so he decided it wasn't really worth his time anymore. So that is one example where we ultimately called it quits and decided that we weren't going to apply anymore. But for the most part, I try not to let a proposal die. I try to keep going and address the reviewers' comments ultimately, but sometimes you do have to let it go.
Hello?
Thanks.
I have one here. Sorry. This is Pablo, and I'm from Peru, from Cayetano Heredia University. 2 questions, 2 separate questions. Is when you come into a new country and a new research culture, how do you engage local researchers so that you gain their trust and they don't see you as a threat or a competition? Okay, so that would be question number 1. And the other, more specifically on K awards, and is that I'm also working on one. And I'm wondering what type of mentorship plans or arrangements do you think these review panels like to see and value in preparation for this application? Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Also good questions. In terms of establishing connections and collaborating with local researchers so they don't see you as a threat, that's a really important thing. And really the most important thing is to establish those relationships and cultivate them. I've worked most of my career in Peru, done some training with organizations in Brazil, and now we may have a site in Bogota, Colombia as well. But the most important thing for me has been to develop those relationships over years with people that I trust and who can trust me. And I think I've seen this both in Lima when I first arrived, and then also when I moved back to Los Angeles. I had a similar experience where people are sort of wary of you at first. It helps to have connections with people that they can trust, but then you may also be stepping into a minefield in terms of pre-existing good or bad relationships with people. So you may align yourself with people who others have a problem with, and that will then transfer to you. But I think the most important thing is to focus on cultivating those relationships over time, letting people get to know you. And like I said before, it's really helpful to start with small projects. So don't just jump right in with a large R01 project for 5 years and $3 million. Focus on a small project that's a small amount of funding, a few month-long projects. So you can get to know each other with collaborators and see if you like working together, if your styles mesh, and if it would be a good subject for future collaboration. But it's something you have to do very carefully. Like I said, I've seen it in both settings, in both Lima and Los Angeles, where people are initially wary of you, and it takes a little bit of time to build trust in each other. In terms of a mentoring team for a K, it's difficult. You want to strike a balance between having a mentoring team that addresses all the different needs of your proposal, all of your different training needs, but you don't want to have a team that's so big. Excuse me. You don't want to have a team that's so big that's unwieldy, and the reviewers think that you'll have a problem actually coordinating people. I think the average size of a good mentoring team is 4 to 5 people. And then, like Dr. Klausner said, diversify your mentors as well. One of the most important things for me during that first year in Peru was that I had Dr. Klausner as well as Dr. Coates and Dr. Cáceres working with me, and they all had different areas of expertise. They all had different working styles, which was extremely important because I think working with just one of them would not have been enough for me, but having the benefit of working with all 3 together, I got advice in different areas, and I also got people pushing me in different ways because of their different working styles and approaches to research. So that diversity was extremely important to me in having that team. And I think especially in a K, you're trying to make a case that you're expanding out into a new area of research. So you need people with expertise in those areas, but you also need people who are going to provide role models and guide you in the research and make sure that it's completed on track. So you want that balance. And again, I think the ideal number of mentors is usually somewhere between 4 and 5, maybe 6.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is Stephen from Makerere University in Uganda. I have a question to follow up on the point you said, point number 3 about take every opportunity, but within reason. I wanted to know from your CV and from your presentation, you seem to have had so many things that were happening at the same time, almost starting when something is ongoing, especially in the area of funding. I wanted to know how do you, when you're doing maybe a GloCal Health Fellowship, did you apply for a grant during that time? How do you deal with the issue of having an existing funding and then you try to apply for another one? What's your comment about that?
Yeah, good question. So when I did GloCal, it actually overlapped. So I already had my K-23, and then I had funding from the GloCal Fellowship. So those worked together at the same time. And I may have had seed grant funding from UCLA at the same time. But the bottom line is that you pretty much always want to be applying for your next grant. Like I said, in terms of the short-term, mid-term, long-term things, the long-term is that you should always be applying for something new. Whether it's a small project like a seed grant from your local institution or a large project like your next R01, because of the amount of time that it takes to get these applications reviewed and then usually re-reviewed and then ultimately funded, you're talking about a matter of years. So you really do not want to be in a situation where you work solely on one project, that project finishes, then you go on to the next one. You want to have different things at different stages of development. Depending on what kind of grant you get, I think the early career development grants that the NIH has are often very helpful because they give you protected time. So at least in the initial years of the grant, you can focus on your research project. You can also work on side projects if you want to. But as I'm finding out now, that's really the only point in your career where you get that kind of protected time to work, to really focus on your research without a lot of other distractions. But any point in your career, I would say you should be applying for grants all the time.
Thank you. That's it.
Hello, my name is Clara from Uganda. My question would be on the mentors. You advised that we could have between 4 and 6 mentors. So when it comes to having consensus from all your mentors, how did you achieve that?
So that's specifically in the context of a K career development grant, where Fogarty has early stage investigator grants, where they expect you to have a mentoring team over the several years of the project. That's what I would say 4 to 6 is the best. In reality, I think you would expect to have 2 to 3 mentors who ideally will work together well and won't give you conflicting advice. And that's something that takes time to figure out. The 3 mentors that I had when I started worked extremely well together. They were at different institutions, but they had overlap. They had complementary areas of expertise in working styles that were different, but complementary to each other. And that was very important. I've seen cases where people have mentors who fundamentally disagree with each other and give completely conflicting advice, which is just a bad situation for everyone to be in. But ultimately, you want to have a core of a couple, maybe 3 different mentors who can give you complementary advice, who can ideally work well together, and who will be the go-to people for advice. One thing I should say as well is that whenever I'm working on revising a paper or proposal or something, and I get comments from a mentor that are different from what I would have done, I actually enjoy that. I think that's actually one of the exciting areas of research, or if you get comments from a reviewer that are different from what you expected. Even if I don't agree with it, I enjoy the challenge of trying to modify the approach or the analysis to address those comments and still do what I want to do. So even if you're getting conflicting advice or advice that differs from what you expect, I wouldn't see it as a problem, but I would try to see it as a challenge to be addressed.
Hi, this is Monica Diaz from UCSD. I'm based in Peru for the next year. So my question is, when you were reapplying for the K-23, sounds like throughout 3 cycles, how did you negotiate protected academic time as a faculty? Because it sounds like you were at UCLA, and then you must have required some sort of research or protected academic time to keep reapplying. So how did you negotiate that or work around that?
Yeah, so when I was applying for the K-23, that's when I was on the T32 postdoctoral training grant. So it was only when I got the K that I was appointed to faculty, so I didn't have to worry about that. I did have to worry, though, in terms of the clock ticking, that I needed to get that K-23 before the postdoc was up in order to get the faculty appointment, in order to stay in Lima and keep my life there doing research. So that's something where it was really important having that initial year when I was doing research, similar to what you all are doing with GloCal, in terms of getting the research done and getting the project started, so that once I started on the T32 postdoc, I didn't spend time doing other research projects. I immediately started writing this K, and then it took almost 2 years from when I started writing it to when it was ultimately funded, and I had the money in hand. So it was when I was on the postdoc that I was able to do that. And yeah, the timeline was difficult, but it all worked out in the end.
Hi, Dr. Clark. My name is Keenan. I'm a UCLA medical student based in Vietnam. I had 2 questions. My first question was, for junior and early career investigators who are interested in pursuing research careers, but did not pursue like an extensive formal PhD degree, I saw that you had an MSc. Do you think a formal research degree would provide you more credibility than just having extensive field research experience and collaborations alone? And then my second question was for someone that's interested in a global health, who's interested in global health research. Do you feel that your specialty or area of expertise plays a role in your funding, such as like going into internal medicine or ID, providing more opportunities than, for example, psychiatry?
Again, excellent questions. In terms of the big question of whether to get a PhD, It all depends on you. So, Keenan, you're a medical student right now. You've got this experience. So you're going to have a year of research under your belt by the time you're even in residency. Then you may have more during fellowship. So in terms of research training, you're going to have a lot by the time you're ready to start applying for NIH grants. Whether you want a PhD or not is entirely a personal decision. I can tell you that MD investigators at the NIH currently are expected to have at least a master's degree in order to be taken seen as credible for applying for research grants. If you don't at least have that master's degree credential, then people just, it's not impossible, but it's a harder road to climb if you don't have any advanced degree at all. If you have a PhD, you may have more credibility. I certainly would not waste the time and the money getting a PhD if that's all you're looking for. I advise people in their research careers. I have a couple fellows I'm working with right now who decided they did want to get a PhD because they wanted to get skills in specific areas, and they felt that getting a PhD would give them the opportunity to get that kind of specialized training in this space they wanted to work in. I've had other people who decided that it's really not worth their time to get a PhD, that they really want to hit the ground running and start doing their research projects, that they already have enough of a foundation with a master's degree in terms of methods, and that a PhD wouldn't add anything much to their portfolio. So it's entirely an individualized decision. As an MD, you need to have at least a master's degree to be taken credibly as a PI on NIH grants. And then in terms of, is your specialty your destiny? Not at all. The smartest people I work with work in areas that are entirely from what they were trained in. So Dr. Tom Coates is a counseling psychologist by training. He works all over the map in HIV prevention. And the work that he does and has done bears very little relation to the initial education and training that he had. Steve Shoptaw, who I work with now, is also a behavioral psychologist and addiction psychologist. His work goes far beyond the boundaries of psychology. I think you'll find as you go along and you collaborate with other people that people come from all different backgrounds, and your initial training doesn't matter that much in terms of what you ultimately decide to do. So whether it's medicine or psychiatry or neurology or family medicine, what's most important is the kind of research training that you have, the research background, and really the title that you have does not make much of a difference. That being said, I think reviewers like to pigeonhole people. So when you're applying for a grant, your role needs to be clearly understood. So my training is in infectious disease. I do a lot more social behavioral work, but my training is in infectious disease. So a lot of times when people put me on a grant, I'm the ID guy. They put me on as the one who knows the clinical stuff about infectious disease or treatment or diagnostics, even though I'm much more on the side of the social behavioral stuff. So like I said, there is that sense of pigeonholing in that, if you're a PhD if you're a psychiatrist as opposed to an internist, that might affect how you position yourself in grants and how people see you. But in terms of what you're actually doing and in terms of your career, it makes very little, if any, difference.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if we're done with questions, I just wanted to thank Dr. Clark. That was a great presentation, and thank you for the great questions. Those were great questions. Keep them in mind also for upcoming webinars. And as a reminder, our next session will be Wednesday, October 15 at this time. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the great questions, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.